In this video, we will continue this beginner arrow building series with my wife Heather here. And in this video, we're going to be going over how to glue in arrow points properly. If you haven't seen the previous videos in regards to selecting arrow shafts and cutting your arrow shafts for beginners, I'll have links in the description below to those, and I'll put a card at the top up there to the beginning of the playlist, so that way you can catch up to where we are here. So we have already selected our arrows, we have already cut her arrows, or she's done that actually, and now we have some components, meaning the arrow points that we are going to be installing into the shaft. We also need to prep the arrow shaft in order to get ready for receiving the actual component glued into it. And we actually need to prep these components, the points, because they're slightly different than other points. They are two pieces. They actually screw together with two different sections. There's a break-off section in the back that's replaceable. It's really cool. I've never seen those before, and very interesting. Perfect for beginners, and that's why we are using them in this video. So we need to first glue this into place, because if for whatever reason these were to somehow vibrate loose inside the arrow shaft, you don't want weights flopping around inside the arrow. Your accuracy is going to go way out the window. So the first thing we need to do is to glue these together. So if you want to open that up. So we're going to be doing this the cheap and easy quick way. We're just going to super glue the actual break off section into the point itself. You know, like I said, it's two pieces and we're just going to make them into one. So you can take them all out and unscrew them. And this is just some super glue. You can use arrow fletching glue. You could do hot melt, I suppose. But this way, it's just the easiest, cheapest, quickest way to do it without having to wait a whole long time for it to dry. So I'm going to wait for, oh, there's some of the glue coming out. And I'm just putting a tiny little bit on the actual threads, like barely a drop. It's just enough to hold it together. Screw it together. Make sure there's no excess glue on the actual shank of the point. So while she's doing this, I will mention that anything we're using in this video, I'll put links in the description below. Things like a countersink drill bit and a propane torch with the pencil tip on it. This is really important to make sure that you're using the correct propane torch tip, because if you're using some of the really powerful and very hot ones that are used to sweat copper together for house plumbing, they are way too hot and they can really affect the arrow in a negative way. So I will put links in the description below for this nice little pencil tip one here, because it's really important to have the right correct one. You can have the little pocket propane torches, things like that. Those actually work quite well as well. But this is just what we have. It sits on a nice base like this, so you can work with both hands while the flame is stationary. It makes it a lot easier to work with. You gotta have a good set of pliers, of course, and some hot melt. So this is something that I love using. This is just an Easton hot melt stick. It's huge. They come in like 13-inch long pieces, and it's easy to use when they're this big. Some of the other hot melt sticks that come with some of the components free from some of the manufacturers are so small that your fingers end up getting really close to the flame, and I've burned myself, I can't even tell you how many times, from the actual flame getting too close to my fingers when I was running out of hot melt. So I'll definitely have links in the description for this as well. So there may be a better way to recommend doing these. I'm not sure. I honestly didn't read the manufacturer's labels, but I've done this in the past and it seems to work out just fine. You know, for this purpose, we're excited to get this stuff done so we can get her shooting with some new arrows. So doing it with some super glue, it's going to hold just fine. Plus, we are going to put hot melt all over the back of the arrow shaft, so all of the arrow shank and everything will be encapsulated in glue, so that way it can't possibly vibrate loose. Some people will only put hot melt down in the bottom section towards the point and not in the back section, and that can lead to loose components and rattling arrows. And if that were to back off, then you have weights sliding around inside the arrows, and it wouldn't be pretty. So these points that we are using are from Top Hat. They are made specifically for these Easton Inspire arrows. They are the biggest range of adjustments and break-offs, and as you can see, the break-off component section is replaceable in case you break off too much. Really cool, something that's not out there anywhere else. And I do like, I like my friend Blackie at the company.
He was really nice.
Yeah, he's a super nice guy. So
he brought me chocolate.
Yeah, you cannot get over European chocolate. It's pretty good.
Yes.
So what we need to do first is we haven't prepped the arrow shaft at all, the end of the arrow shaft. So there is an interesting liner on the inside of these arrows that was a little difficult to cut for the arrow saw. So we've got to clean that up a little bit, and then we'll need to get in there and kind of clean out some of the carbon dust to make sure things adhere to each other. Although we are using hot melt, it's just essentially a very, it's probably not even advanced, but it's some sort of hot melt stick. I wouldn't go to your local craft store and buy some glue. I would get hot melt because it melts at a higher temperature, I believe. So it's less likely to heat up when the arrow goes into a target, and you're not going to lose your points. I've seen it happen a lot. So don't do that. Get yourself some regular arrow hot melt. So this is just a simple countersink bit. It's nothing fancy. It's just something from, you countersink holes when you're putting screws in stuff. Like, that's all it is. I'll have links in the description for that. Some people, they do make arrow specific chamfering bits. They're just overpriced countersink bits. So what you want to do is, you can see there's that burr on the inside of the shaft still that sticks out a little bit from the liner, and you just want to push it into the shaft like that and just kind of clean it up, and it preps that end of the shaft. So it's definitely still a little bit there because of the liner. It's just something odd as far as I've never seen before. So I'll just give it a couple extra turns, and now you can see it's gone.
Yeah, that's better.
Yeah, so all we're doing is just taking the burr off that's in the middle of the shaft on the inside, so that way the arrow point will fit in there nice and smooth and easy, and it'll sit flat and flush up against the shaft. So I'm going to grab this camera that I have sitting here, and I'll do a close-up view so you can see what she's doing and prepping the arrow shaft itself. So this is the first step in prepping your arrows. So you'll see here, these are the unprepped shafts, and you'll see that there's a little bit of like a nub sticking out of the center of the shaft where the liner is coming out. That the inner piece in there, you can see those little burrs sticking out. And these shafts down here.
Did I do enough?
Yep. Yeah, that looks good. So that shaft down there is prepped, and you can see that that little inner sleeve is not there anymore. And it's prepped to be a lot cleaner and smoother.
So I'm not putting much pressure.
Nope.
Is that correct?
Yeah, not much pressure at all. Just enough to kind of
contact?
Yeah, contact and scrape away and cut this junk out of the way. Because you don't want to actually be removing material. There's really no need. All we're doing is just cleaning it up and cleaning the burrs off, basically.
Should I only go one direction, or does it matter?
Yeah, so the way you're turning it, you can see that it only cuts the one direction.
Right.
So yeah, that's exactly right. So after you chamfer your arrow shafts, what you would want to do next is to clean the inside of the shaft out of carbon dust, especially if you're going to be using an epoxy or a quick setting super glue, basically. That would really be required because the point will actually adhere to the dust and it won't stick to the shaft itself. But because we're using hot melt and we're going to be using the technique that I'm going to show Heather on how to properly put the components in and glue them in the best way possible, there's no possible way that the carbon dust inside is going to adhere or stick to this. So all you need to do is simply just kind of drop them, and the chunks and the flakes and the dust will come out of the end. Now,
but you poked it first, right?
I did, but it's loose. It just kind of sits in there. So again, these arrows are just something tricky. There's some sort of sleeve in there that makes them a little difficult to actually cut and get some components in. Although the tolerances on these Top Hat components are really high compared to other arrow manufacturers' points.
What do you mean
the tolerances meaning, well, they're probably using some really good German steel because they do come from Germany. And German steel actually has a really, honestly, a bit more of a dense molecular structure than Chinese or American steel in general, especially in the past. Now it's potentially a little more different. But what they can do is they can machine them with a higher tolerance. So they'll machine them to the exact perfect larger size, the exact size that they are, which are on the larger end of the spectrum. Because the other cheaper ones, their tolerances aren't so good, so they'll cut them on the lower end of the size, and there's always a little bit of a gap. So these are tight inside the shaft. Yeah, so it's really not too complicated. You know, like I said, if you're using epoxy or if you're using super glue, because I've super glued points in that I know that I don't need to get out again, and it's just so much faster that way, and it's way easier. They never come out on me. I actually really prefer using super glue, and if we weren't going to be potentially breaking off points and cutting the arrows, we'd be doing super glue in hers too. I use the gel, so it's not fast set. It's slower to dry. You can get it in there and rotate it and then wipe off the excess, and it stays nice and clean. You could use 5-hour epoxy or so. I wouldn't use 5-minute epoxy because in general, the longer the epoxy takes to cure, the stronger the bond is in general. Like a 24-hour epoxy is way stronger than a 5-minute epoxy. So I would definitely steer clear of those fast setting ones. But for this purpose, we're just going to use hot melt again. It's cheap and it works great. So now that everything is prepped, we are going to glue in the first components. I'm going to glue one in for her, the very first one, and explain what I'm doing. So that way she can follow along, and then as she's going, I'll show you some close-ups, what she's working with, and how to do it. So obviously you need your torch. So this is actually a much lazier flame than I would actually prefer, but this is just what we have laying around. Usually I like a nice little pinpoint, but a very small one. So this is just, it's a bit of a lazier flame, but it works just fine. Because these are steel, you can use your fingers. I'm going to use a pair of pliers because it's a little bit safer, and it'll allow me a lot better leverage and not have to worry about slipping and dealing with something that's heating up as I'm doing this. So what I like to do is I like to take the arrows and I like to have them laying on the table, especially if they're in front of me, easy to grab, in the same manner that I'm going to be gluing in these components. I have my point in the pliers in my non-dominant hand. It doesn't matter, I just prefer it to do this way. The hot melt in my right hand, my dominant hand, and the arrow ready to grab with my dominant hand. So I will heat up the point, heat up some hot melt, add the hot melt, set the hot melt down, make sure the hot melt's nice and hot, and then I'll be pushing the arrow into the shaft.
Just like doing a rod tip.
Yes,
Exactly the
I
same.
guess so. Not that I've done one, but
Hundreds.
excellent. So it's really simple and straightforward. What you need to pay attention to is the method that I'm actually putting the shaft onto the actual arrow point. All right, you'll see me spinning the arrow shaft and putting it on and off, on and off, on and off. I won't take it completely off because it's a little tricky to get back on, but doing this on and off, it takes the glue that I'm going to be spreading on there and spreads the glue evenly all the way around all these little ridges and stuff like that, because each one of these ridges is designed to be there because that's where some glue stays. And so it makes it stick a little bit better. You'll see as I heat this up, it kind of has a bit of a white hue, and then it kind of burns away. I don't know if you can see that at all. It's just kind of like a water vapor, basically. See, it's just starting to go away now. So it's like some water vapor that just kind of burns off as you heat it up. It could be some sort of oils or things like that. It's always good to just kind of get it warmed up a little bit, but not too hot. And then I start to heat this hot melt up. It'll start to bubble. As you can see, it's bubbling. And then I just kind of spread a liberal amount on the actual point itself. Not all the way up and down. I don't need to spread it any more than really just this one area here. And it is stringy and nasty, so it always helps. And you'll see that I do this circle like that because the strings get stuck and it's not so messy. As you can see on the end of this torch, somebody's borrowed my torch and got hot melt dripped all over it, and that's why this flame is lazy. It clogged one of the air ports in there. So you don't need to get it super hot, but in this time, at this point, you really need to make sure the hot melt is fairly hot. You don't want the shank of the shaft to be super hot because then it's heating up the actual arrow, the carbon, and you don't want to put heat into the arrow. If this point were to get stuck, or if you're trying to remove points from other arrow shafts, heat only the shank. Don't heat the shaft of the carbon because it will overheat and it'll start delaminating. So even though this is cooled down, it's not the end of the world. All I need to do is put the hot melt back in the heat. I'm going to add a little bit to the actual shank, and you'll see it'll start to bubble. But you'll see as it's bubbling, I'm rotating it like this, because if it gets too hot, it's going to drip. And I can tell you, do this over a table, and make sure your legs are under the table, and make sure you're not wearing shorts, because I have dripped this hot melt on my legs, and it is horrible, the burns you'll get. So be really careful. I get the bubbles, so I'm just keeping it liquid, and now I'm going to spin the shaft on and off. And now it's starting to slow down because it's getting too cooled. I'm going to put a little bit of heat back into it and give it that last little bit of twist and push. And so now it's good to go. It's done. I'm going to push it and just hold it till it cools. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the arrow, and what I prefer to do, I just don't have it down here, I forgot, is to have a coffee cup full of water. Because then you can set it right in there. It's not a big deal. We won't use that.
My water?
No, full of water. But you can just do it like this on a counter and lean it against the wall. So what that's doing is the weight of the shaft is pushing down on the point, and it's keeping the point and the shaft together. It's extremely important to do it this way and make sure you have weight on it like that, because if you were to be gluing in points and pins in your shaft, or if you already have the knock in your shaft like we do and you're gluing in the arrow point, you're actually building pressure inside the arrow. And if you were to set it down as it is cooling, that pressure inside the arrow is starting to push that point out ever so slightly. So it's important to store it like that as it cools. And at the end, I'll show you how to strip the hot melt off the arrow in the correct manner that you must do this way. If you do it any other way, you risk ripping carbon off of your arrows, and you do not want to do it that way. So stick around until the end to see how I pull the hot melt off of the cooled shafts. Do you want me to do another one, or do you want to go for it?
Go ahead. One more.
So again, I get everything positioned. It's important because I don't want to reach over the flame hurriedly and burn myself.
Of course.
Yeah. So once you get good, you can heat the shaft and the hot melt at the same time. Or I mean the point and the hot melt at the same time. Keep everything hot. So I got that one all the way. That's it. So, really important. Actually, I'm going to go get you a different pair of pliers that'll be easier to grab the points with, because if you're not squeezing it, it slipped, and I don't want you to cut the shaft up. You can try it with this one.
I can probably try. Alright, so...
And don't worry if that spinning in and out doesn't happen quick enough as it starts to cool. We'll just heat up the end of the point and push it in the rest of the way.
Sounds great.
Yeah. And I won't be mad at you if you drip hot melt in there, for the record.
Oh, nice. Good.
Yeah.
There's a risk. I was like, is this something we're going to need marriage counseling over?
No, definitely not. Okay, your hot melt's good and hot. Get it on that last end section.
Is it like the last 3 or the last
just
2?
last 2.
Oh, crap. Well,
It's fine. No, 3 is fine. It doesn't matter. Like I said, be liberal with it. If you put too much on, we just take it off at the end. If you don't have enough, that's when you can actually have a couple of problems. So, yeah. Spin as you're going in and out. Good. You'll want to add heat to it, probably. Yeah.
Oops. You were right about the slipping.
Yeah.
Is it in all the way?
I don't know. Maybe. So, we'll do it. Because this last little bit, this last push is the most important.
Ah.
Because...
Oh, I forgot about that push.
Yeah, and so you want to go right from this to the cabinet, because if it heats up, it'll start coming out. It's happened to me, and once you rip the hot melt off, you'll see a gap between the end of the shaft and the point. It happens. So she's struggling with the pliers just like I was. Did you poke yourself?
No, it's just...
Yeah, it hurts.
You have to squeeze them really hard.
So my favorite pliers to use for putting in components are knock pliers. So the basic cheap knock pliers work the best, because the opening for where the brass crimping thing is for brass crimp knocks, like your knocking point, they are perfect for arrow points. They sit right inside of there, and so they actually grip much better. So, and they're regular plier handles,
That's a lot better.
so they're a lot more comfortable. I will put links for those as well. It's nice to have a little bit better tooling for doing this type of stuff because it makes things a lot more comfortable. So you'll see our hot melt's just starting to gooey up. It doesn't need to bubble.
Oh, okay.
But, yeah.
I almost stripped it on your thing.
You caught it. You didn't. Yeah, and that's plenty. Yeah. Yeah, you do better with some 24-hour epoxy. A little bit more familiar with that in the boating stuff anyway, huh?
I don't know. I mean, I've changed a lot of rod tips, and this is what you do.
Really?
Yeah.
Huh.
Yeah, it's all melt glue and...
So in that last little bit, you can just close the plier tips, or close the pliers and just push it right into the hole. What I mean by the last push is just close them and just push into the hole.
Oh, like that.
Yeah,
I
that
understand.
last push. It'll make it much easier for you.
Thank you.
Yeah. So what I was explaining to her is for that last push is to just close the pliers and then push the tip into the pliers because that's a nice soft, well, it's not soft, but it's a nice circle that the arrow point can be, pushed right into without it slipping off. Good. So the reason I like the coffee cup with the water in it is because you can just take the arrow when it's ready to be cooled and you just drop it in the cup and the weight of the arrow sits in it. The water cools it nice and quick and it can lean against the wall and it holds the arrow there just fine. It just makes it a little bit easier. I wouldn't do it in a plastic cup or anything like that, especially if you're new to this, because some people get these points really, really hot, which you don't want to do. But I've seen plastic cups melt. Okay, so we have actually left a few arrows without components glued in. We left 5 of them. We probably should have just done 6, but the reason that we're not doing all the dozen is because we're not sure. We may need to reduce the weight of the points or potentially shorten the arrows if they are too weak. So the whole point of this was trying to build a set of arrows for somebody who has no idea what to do and no idea where to start. So I always recommend don't build all of them because you may need to pull them out and break components off or shorten arrows, and it just takes a lot of extra time to take them in and out. And all you need really is a handful of arrows, probably 3 arrows, 2 arrows at the minimum, and 4 arrows at best to get an idea of what your tune is actually doing. Oh. So we have 7, not a big deal. I just forgot and we just kept going. So now that everything is cooled down, I'm going to show you how to properly take off the hot melt. You'll see it's in a chunk on the end. You can wipe it off when it's still hot, but it still leaves residue everywhere. Doing it this way makes it really clean the way it comes off. So the rule is take it, and you want to take the hot melt section and push it towards the tip of the point. So you want to push it off this direction like that. And all it does, it pops right off in a nice little donut. It's nice and clean. There's no junk laying around or anything. But what you don't want to do is you do not, and I'm going to do it on this one because it's already done, do not go this way. If you go that way, you will rip off carbon, and I wouldn't grab a chunk of it and peel it off like, in a circle. You want to push it off as a chunk like that. And it will come off nice and clean, and you won't shred the carbon on your arrows. So as she's doing this, I am going to do a close-up so you can see what she's actually doing on one of them. But I want to make sure that if you haven't yet, please hit the subscription button and the notification bell so that way you're notified when we're uploading new videos to this series and other series within my channel. We are going to continue this to the very end. We are going to get her set up and tune tune the arrows, get her bow aligned and everything, and get her set up as best as we possibly can. So we have a couple more episodes into this. We still need to fletch the arrows. We have quite a few things to do, so we would appreciate that.
Okay, so as someone who's new, I got this one pretty gross.
It happens.
So
just get in there and
just
peel it
still
off,
going towards...
but push towards the point.
Okay.
Yeah, so when you have something like this happen,
it won't be a donut.
There's a bunch of excess glue that kind of just gets stuck on the actual shaft and everything because the pliers slipped. Makes for a bit of a harder cleanup, and it doesn't come off in a nice simple little donut pop like that. But it still cleans off just fine. You just got to push it towards the point. Don't go back. Again, you'll rip the carbon off. I'm only saying that because I did that on an X10 one day, and it sucked. Hey, thanks for watching. If you like this video, consider hitting the subscription button and the notification bell, as well as the like button. I would appreciate it. Also, please consider supporting my channel. If you head to my website, jakekaminski.com, there'll be info and links on Patreon, apparel, books, and equipment sales, PayPal donate button, a P.O. box to send things to, and above all else, please share this video because there's no better advertising than word of mouth.